So here's white versus Philidor. I guess this is video 3. e4, e5, knight f3, d6, d4. This is more energetic than the move in the last game we saw, which was bishop c4. Oh, wrong one. d4. Queen e7 question mark. Knight c3. c6. Black has certainly neglected his development, but no one can accuse him of neglecting to control the center with his pawns. The pawn on c6 guards the d5 square, and thanks to his eccentric-looking third move, the e5 pawn remains in place, contesting the d4 square. Bishop c4. h6. Remember Greco's bishop on c4 in the extract above? So black here is more careful. He continues his strategy of using his pawns to keep the white knight at bay. If instead he had played knight f6, then d takes e5, d takes e5, knight g5, and the attack on f7 will force black to allow his pawns to be wrecked. With bishop e6, knight takes e6, f takes e6. So here he played h6 instead. Castles, knight f6. White can be said to have achieved a textbook development. Pawns on d4 and e4, knights on c3 and f3, bishop on c4, and a king safely castled. This is the sort of model of opening play we recommend to players not long after they have first learnt the moves. In contrast, the moves of the game. In contrast, black seems to have broken most of the rules with his flurry of little pawn moves. Nevertheless, black has remained true to one principle. If you're behind in development, keep the position closed. His pawns, like the bristles of a porcupine, are warding off the white pieces from encroaching on his central space. So now what can white do to break through? It is unlikely, though, although not entirely impossible, that he might be able to arrange a piece sacrifice to break the black fortress. However, a far more realistic plan is to use his own pawns to smash through the obstacles and win squares for his pieces. One approach would be the pawn advance c2, c4, c5, ramming the d6 pawn. But the pawn is obstructed by both the bishop on c4 and the knight on c3. Suddenly we see that white's ideal quote-unquote setup of pieces has a downside. Another more plausible plan for white is the preparation of f2 to f4, as this only requires the knight on f3 to move out of the way. a4. First of all, however, white takes the chance to gain space on the queen side. He also is keen to prevent black from expanding with b5, when the excellently placed quote-unquote bishop suddenly finds itself a target of attack. Queen c7. a5. White is in no hurry to exchange with d takes e5, d takes e5, as it would open up the way for the black bishop to go to b4 or c5. As a general principle, with this type of center, white delays or avoids an exchange on e5 as long as possible. He hopes that black will be the first to blink with e5 takes d4, conceding the center. So here we had a5. Bishop e7. Knight h4. Knight a6. There were 2 points behind white's last move. Firstly, it cleared the way for f2, f4, as discussed above. And secondly, it gave white the chance to answer a move like, let's try, castles with knight g6, rook e8, because notice this pawn is pinned here. Rook e8, knight takes e7 check, queen takes e7. The bishop on e7 might be an unremarkable piece at the moment, but its loss will be felt once the game opens up. White's ninth move was also tactically sound. Remember what we said about black needing to keep the center blocked as he's behind in development? So let's say that after this knight h4, black had played knight takes e4. Knight takes e4, bishop takes f4, d takes e5, and the deadly knight to d6 check is about to follow. So, again back. Knight a6. D takes e5. Tactics always come before strategy. We said above that white was reluctant to make this exchange. However, a different move like, there we go, f4, e takes f4, queen takes d4, d5 would be a nuisance, as besides an attack on the white bishop, there's the threat of bishop c5. One can't be too careful. White would have to bail out with bishop takes a6, b takes a6, when he has avoided losing material, but he can't rejoice at giving up his strong bishop for an inactive knight. So here we had d takes e5, d takes e5, f4. And white has achieved the strategically desirable advance. Knight b4.